What is up, guys? Facepunch coming at you with some raid cam footage from early game Rust on the US Rustopia server. As always, Rustopia is a vanilla Rust server, which means that it is the game as it's intended to be experienced at this point in time. There's no special modifications or enhancements, so bear that in mind and things might look different down the road. When we say early game Rust, we mean it's after the start of a fresh wipe cycle, which is when the map is barren and the players have to build their bases, so things are still very vulnerable and low tech in terms of the technology. The players here, in terms of the raid team, do have numbers, but they probably have very few resources with them, so everything they have is very precious. If they go down, they're going to feel that much more than late game Rust, when they might be able to come back re-geared or re-kitted. Inside the base here is Soap and Mana. They are not putting up the fight that they should be. They do have resources up there, as we'll see later in the footage, and I'm not sure what's really going on up there, but they seem more concerned with protecting their loot room at the top of their base than with really neutralizing that raid team that's coming up through their base. So as always, guys, whether it's early game or late game, raiding is going to be a battle of resources, so you want to be able to be sure you're matching what the raiders are destroying. In terms of the nakeds out here, they started attacking each other and one of them went down. They helped that member back up, and then they formed in a pack here and realized they were going to be stronger in numbers. It was really cool to see the nakeds rush the raid team. They ran at them viciously, and for really all intents and purposes, they're putting up a better fight than the defenders. They're absolutely charging towards the raiders here with less resources, less supplies, and I guess less to lose, so that's sometimes why you fight more ferociously. But this is why guys like Beach Hills and Pharaoh are so successful. They are beasts when they come at players, and that's what these players are doing as well here. They're just charging forward with whatever they have. You're going to fear them if they have a bow, a rock, it doesn't matter, because they have the heart, they have the fight, and that's what Mana and Soap don't have here. So we're not going to rank on Mana and Soap too much, guys. Let's be constructive. They're probably newer players from the looks of their base design and also from their tactics. So let's offer them some constructive criticism and what tactics you guys would use in a situation like this if you had been Mana and Soap. So the biggest thing is they needed to get down to those battle stations in their base. They put embrasures in their base, but they weren't using them. And they have a doorway up top, which they will start using in a moment to shoot from. But those should have been used a lot sooner. There was a fight that occurred in the base on a lower floor that I wasn't able to capture footage of earlier on, but the floors above it hadn't been compromised, and for whatever reason Mana and Soap didn't think to go to their battle stations. So that's the first mistake. The second mistake is they're not patching up the base as the holes are being blown into it. Raiding, really, whether it's going to be in that early game or the later game, really is going to be contingent upon which side's going to have more to put into it. And that small raid base that the raiders are coming out of doesn't have much resources in there. It doesn't have many spots to really put anything. It has a small crate, so that's going to have very limited storage capacity, so they don't have a lot to bring to the raid here. That also is why it's so significant that when the nakeds come back, they keep taking out that twig raid tower. Even though it's twig, they need to keep putting wood into that, and because it's early game, they don't have a lot of spare wood to carry around with them, because that's gone into their own bases to fortify it and to build it up. So some more nakeds are joining the fray here. This is again why early game Rust is so fun. Lots of people are out roaming the landscape, so the interactions are going to happen a lot more freely, a lot more sort of organically, if you will, and it's a really fun time in the game, and one that I'm excited to show off because I haven't spent a lot of time capturing it. It goes by so quickly. But getting back to the raid cam here, Easy, who is one of the raiders who was on guard duty out here, is down on the ground. He was the beast with the pistol a while ago, so it's good that he went down because he was the biggest threat towards those incoming nakeds. And I always root for the nakeds, I always root for the underdog, because that's fun to see in Rust, the guys who are, you know, coming at it from the disadvantaged, you know, standpoint. So they keep taking out that raid tower, and that is exactly what needs to be done. If you're not familiar, guys, with what a raid tower is, I have to assume some people might not play Rust who watch these videos. So a raid tower is simply a structure to build up and get up over a wall or onto a base itself. They weren't able to get up onto the base itself, but they were able to build it up and out enough to vault over that high exterior stone wall. They still have to watch out for the barbed wire. So you can see here that the raiders are now up onto a floor above where they were before, and they've taken over one of the battle stations that they're using to defend against the nakeds who are attacking the raiders. So base defenders are now having the raiders use their own defenses against people who are trying to help them. Again, Mana and Soap are online. They're not offline. They're not AFK. They're moving around up there. I was checking back in with some of the footage that I had to leave out, and they just kept looking through their crates. They weren't really responding to what was going on down below. Back outside, the nakeds keep coming out of the woodwork. Every bush seems to have one, and they have a lot of heart, a lot of fight, and this is really what makes this raid camp for me. If it hadn't had the nakeds in it fighting as hard, I probably wouldn't have been able to justify putting this footage together. But I think there's a lot to learn from this as well. So the Twig Raid Tower that is here is something that is going to be very problematic in a moment, you'll see, for the raiders, because they run out of wood. And that again is why that early game is so critical, because the resources are just not there the way that they are in the late game. And that keeps it fresh, it keeps it intense, and this is where Soap and Mana are really losing their focus. So they're focused on the top of the base, and they're focused on protecting that, which is not what you want to necessarily do in a raid. You have to assume that that's what you want to protect, because of course it is, but you have to get out there and mix it up. You have to be in the middle of that base, patching it up as it's being blown into, shooting at the raiders. If you can make the raiders go down, if you can get their gear, especially in early game, they're not going to be able to come back as viciously and quickly as they will in late game. And you might think there's a lot of raiders here, and there certainly are, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the raid couldn't have gone the other way very quickly. We've seen very large raid camps. Think of World War Restopia, for instance, where a lot of people were taken out because of a base that was well constructed with the flank towers and the different positions. And this isn't one of those bases, so don't mistake me for saying this is a wonderful base design. Again, I believe that Soap and Mana are new players, but they still had some defensive positions in there that should have been utilized. They have a door that they're using. In a moment, you'll see that they're opening it and shooting from, and you might wonder why use a door when you have things like embrasures. Well, the door gives you a better vantage point, because when you open it, you can see the full length of the character model. That also means that your silhouette's going to be more pronounced, so it works both ways. Inside the base, there was a pretty vicious bloodbath with a shotgun here, in which No Way said no way when they came out of the door there and blasted away the defenders. He's not able to yet get up there, but if another buddy comes in, they'll be able to boost up there, no problem. Boosting means you stand on another player and you're able to jump to an area that you wouldn't be able to access otherwise. This is a cool shot. I'm really glad I captured it. It shows the raider on the bottom, the defender on the top, and I think it has a cool perspective. So this is the door that Mana's using. That's again what we were just speaking about, and those are great to employ in your base designs, not only for the perspective to shoot from it, but you can fit through it, right? So you can't fit through a embrasure, and you can't fit through a window that you put necessarily at all, rather. You can't fit through a window that you put up the window bars over. So the door, it has pros and cons, but the pros outweigh the cons in my mind, because it's a mode of egress as well, so you can get out of your base. And oftentimes in a raid, you're going to need to get out your base and flank the raiders and keep bringing the fight to them. Now, what Mana and Soap don't know is that they could probably survive that fall. Rust, the fall damage is not what you might think it would be, so they could get down there and actually take out that raid tower. And in the cover of night here, it's not really to their advantage to have that campfire going, because they need it to stay cold, but as you can see, it allows that the raiders down below to be able to see right up into that base, and it makes the silhouette of Mana up there stand out in a much more pronounced way than if that fire wasn't burning. But they're judiciously toggling the fire there, which means they're getting the benefits of it and then managing the drawbacks by turning it off. And outside here, you can see that the raiders have to gather more resources, so they're hitting trees. They're also trading supplies through the port here in the high exterior stone gateway. That was something that I wasn't fully aware of. I do remember seeing that before in an update video that I was doing, but you can go ahead and throw the resources through there, catch them just like you can if you're throwing to a player who's at a different level. And that just goes to show how effective that high exterior stone gateway is. It's a really versatile base building option. So in the base here, Mana and Soap are still very focused on that main loot room. Soap, it looks like, has taken up a position on the door, and night is now turning to day. We can see that the base has been further hollowed out. At the bottom of the base here, this is interesting occurrence because the Nakeds are forming in here. They appear to now be attacking one another. I'm not sure if they're different Nakeds, but the Raiders are no longer concerned with the bottom floor. They're up top. They are shooting rockets and trying to get up to the last part of the base, which is going to be the loot room that Mana and Soap have so delicately been protecting this entire raid. Again, I think if they had done things differently, the Raiders perhaps never would have reached this loot room if they had been using those resources in a more forward-thinking manner. But again, I think they're newer players, so again, let's offer them some constructive feedback. The door outside that loot room is covered by one Raider at this point in time with a pistol right on that doorway. Mana's in here with a bolty, and it looks like Soap has a submachine gun, an SMG there. So they could probably take out that one Raider, but the other Raiders aren't far behind. THC has now joined him, and he's got a shotgun, so he's going to light them up when that door goes down or gets open. So this is a very tense moment, and this is really where it's going to change the tides of the raid. I think this raid was a foregone conclusion with the lack of fight that the defenders had, but they're trying their best to manage what's going on here. But they should have been doing this a lot longer and in a lot lower level of the base. But see, they are using resources to patch up their loot room. I know they care a lot about that loot room, so they're patching it up. They opened a door here to try to go ahead and manage what was going on with the rocket and perhaps flank the Raiders. They closed it, but unfortunately the wall came down just at that moment. But that was a really cool scene to capture, to see that wall come down as that door is closing, and just it gets lit up. Some of the Raiders go down, some of the defenders go down, but that again is why the early game is so intense. The playing field seems more level, and it's a time that I'm really excited to see it extended with the introduction of that experience system. I think that's what that's all about for the most part, is really extending these phases of the game. Again, the Nakeds are coming back, turning this into a melee arena down bottom. Bone clubs, hatchets are weapons of the day down here, and it's really fun to watch. But at this point, we wanted to go ahead and just kind of talk more generally about what to learn from this raid. So the biggest takeaway here, guys, is that you got to have heart in the fight, and you can't assume that the raid's over. Mana and Soap should have been putting up the same fight you saw them putting up in the loot room in the base at a much lower level. So that should have been what was going on. That would have been a way that they could have managed the damage that was being done by the Raiders. And in terms of what the Raiders did, they had some really good tactics as well. Yes, they had numbers, but I do kind of think that Raiders always have to be disproportionate in terms of defenders and just how the mechanics of the game are at this point in time. Beta 82, peace.